Sometimes, one random act becomes the beginning of an entire life. Unknown author. In their old building on the edge of town, Eleanor Vance was known simply as Miss Ellie. Not out of disrespect, no. More out of habit, out of a feeling that she had always been there. Like the old oak tree in the courtyard, remembering times when neighbors didn't just text each other, but simply knocked on the door to borrow a cup of sugar or just chat over a cup of tea. She had turned 77. The age showed in her slow walk, in the fine web of wrinkles around her eyes, but the eyes themselves. Oh, her eyes were different. They held none of the weariness of old age, or, God forbid, anger at the world. Only quiet. A deep, calm quiet of a person who had seen much, endured much, and accepted it. She lived alone. Completely alone. A small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a gray, blocky 5-story building. Everything in it breathed the past. An old sideboard with dulled glass, a creaky sofa covered with a faded throw blanket. Yet, amidst it all, there was an astonishing, almost sterile cleanliness. Dust was wiped every other day, as if on an invisible schedule. The floor was washed strictly on Fridays, and on the windowsill, African violets bloomed, her only living company. Each had its own name, Penelope, Daisy, Martha, and she never mixed them up, talking to them as if they were friends, sharing the simple news of the day. Her husband, George, had died long ago, not from a terrible illness, not in a war. Time had simply taken him, quietly, inevitably. Her son was both her pain and her hope. He had moved overseas some 15 years ago. At first he wrote often, sent photos, a foreign life, foreign smiles. Then the letters became rarer, shorter. And then just silence. The last email arrived 7 years ago. Short, businesslike. She had printed it on her neighbor's old printer and hung it on the wall by the kitchen table. Sometimes she would walk over, reread the familiar lines, peering at the letters as if trying to see a living person behind them, like looking through a window into that yellowed sheet of paper. She didn't know her grandchildren, not at all, only from photos sent long ago. Small, unfamiliar faces. She wasn't angry at her son. No, more like she had resigned herself, accepted this too. Like the autumn rain, like the first snow. Her Social Security check was meager, just over $800 a month. Pay the utilities, buy the essential blood pressure pills, heart medication, and what was left? A handful of coins. Enough for bread, a carton of milk, some grits. Sometimes, on days that felt like special holidays for the soul, she'd buy a small bag of hard candies. 1 or 2 for herself with her evening tea, and she always set aside a few. What if my granddaughter stops by? But no one ever stopped by. For years. Each of her mornings was like the one before, like 2 drops of water. At 6:45 sharp, the old alarm clock with the chipped enamel edge would shriek. At 7 ow, the familiar whistle of the kettle on the gas stove. At 7:15, oatmeal made with water. Rarely, if finances allowed, with a tiny pat of butter. At 8 she turned on the radio. The old receiver in the kitchen came alive, filling the silence with voices. News, the local news station, the weather forecast. She always listened intently, as if something important depended on it. Then some endless talk about politics, about medicine. She listened not because it was interesting, but because at least someone was speaking in her empty apartment, creating the illusion of presence. Sometimes her hand reached for the television, but they were almost always shouting on there, arguing, yelling, proving something with foam at the mouth. She would sigh and turn it off. The shouting gave her a headache and made her heart ache. There was no one to talk to. Absolutely no one. So her companions became things. The old television. What's with the static again, old-timer? The stove. Don't smoke, please, dearie. And of course, the violets. Well, Penelope, drooping your leaves again? I just watered you yesterday. Don't make things up. And you, Daisy, come on now, bloom. How long can you just grow leaves? I want some beauty. Once a week, usually on Thursdays, she went to the market. Not the supermarket with its bright lights and soulless self-checkout counters, but the old, dusty market nearby, with her unchanging woven tote bag in hand. She walked slowly, very slowly, not just to save energy, but also, as she herself said with a quiet smile, to admire the people, to watch the hustle and bustle, to listen to snippets of conversation. In her coat pocket, she always had the exact change counted out, so as not to hold up the line, not to make people wait. If it turned out she didn't have enough money for something, she returned the item without a hint of embarrassment or argument. Oh no, I won't take the potatoes today. That's all right. I'll manage for now. The vendors knew her, many for years. Some, seeing her modest figure, would occasionally slip an extra apple or a piece of candy into her bag. Some pretended to forget the price of a bunch of dill. But mostly, they just nodded from afar, habitually, as if she were an integral part of this market landscape, the quiet old lady who was always alone. And then, one day, having received her modest check, she allowed herself a small joy. She bought a savory hand pie with potato filling at the station. Just one. Hot. Fragrant. For herself, a treat for dinner. She sat down on a cold bench near the entrance to the station building. There were many people, noise, commotion. She ate slowly, tearing off tiny pieces, savoring the warmth and taste. Nearby, on the same bench, practically huddled, sat a young man. Very young, thin, pale to the point of bluishness. His eyes, huge, frightened, staring somewhere into the cracks in the pavement. Empty. A backpack slung over his shoulders, old, battered, with a torn strap. The coat hung loosely on him, clearly someone else's, a couple of sizes too big. It was immediately obvious, not local, lost. Eleanor Vance looked at him, looked for a long time, and suddenly felt, not pity, something else, sharp, prickly, as if something inside her snapped and resonated with recognition. Recognition of that confusion, that despair. She silently reached into her bag for the second-hand pie. She had bought two, one for herself, the other, just in case. She held it out to him. Take it, eat, it's still warm. The young man flinched, raised his huge, frightened eyes to her. Disbelief flickered in them, then surprise. Thank you. His voice was quiet, cracked. I just need to get home. I have no money at all. She didn't ask questions. Who he was, where he was from, what had happened. Why use words? Everything was written on his face, in his slumped figure. She simply reached into her old purse, took out her wallet. And inside lay the envelope she had just received, her entire Social Security check, just over $800, everything she had until next month. She looked at the young man, then at the envelope. She took a deep breath, so deep her heart skipped a beat for a moment, and handed him the envelope. The whole thing. Here, buy yourself a ticket. Go home. Just don't lose it, and don't lose yourself. That's important. He looked at her the way one looks at a miracle, disbelievingly, as if he saw before him not an elderly woman in an old coat, but light, bright, warm light. With trembling hands, he took the envelope, opened his mouth, wanted to say something, but found no words. Only tears sprang from his eyes. He clutched the envelope in his fist, stood up abruptly, and almost ran towards the ticket counters. Right at the entrance, he turned around, just once. Their eyes met. She gave him a faint wave, as if to say, "Go on, everything will be all right." And then she went home. The walk seemed shorter than usual. At home, she brewed tea, plain hot water, no sugar. Sat by the window, watching the darkening courtyard. And for the first time in many, many years, she smiled. A real smile. Warm. Maybe at least one made it to his own home, she said quietly to her favorite violet, Penelope. And it seemed to her that the violet nodded a leaf in response. And that very evening, its first delicate lavender flower in a long time bloomed. The morning after that encounter at the station, Eleanor Vance woke up as usual to the ring of the old alarm clock. The kettle habitually hissed on the stove. A gray dawn broke outside the window. The violets on the windowsill silently watched her slow movements. Everything was as always, except that the wallet, lying on the shelf in the sideboard, was empty. Completely empty. Not a dollar, not a cent. She sat down at the kitchen table, poured herself a mug of hot water. The last of her tea bags had been used yesterday. She ate the leftover oatmeal from the day before, plain, without butter. There would be no hand pie today. But strangely, inside, she felt calm, even light somehow, as if she had shed some invisible burden. The deed was done, the decision made. There were no doubts. Had she done the right thing? Who knew? But she couldn't have done otherwise. Just a boy. So lost, she whispered, stirring her spoon in the empty mug. Maybe he really made it. Maybe someone met him. His mother must be waiting. She nodded to herself, as if encouraging not herself, but that unknown young man, mentally wishing him a safe journey. But the calm didn't last long. Just 3 days after that encounter, the difficulties began. Unnoticeable at first, then increasingly palpable. The bread ran out. The milk, too. Only some grits and a few potatoes remained. Her neighbor, Brenda, from across the hall, a kind soul, noticed that Miss Ellie hadn't left her apartment and knocked. She offered to lend her some money until her next check, or at least bring over some groceries. But Eleanor Vance politely but firmly refused. "Thank you, Brenda dear. Don't worry. I have everything I need. No rush. I'll manage somehow." Pride, or the habit of never asking anyone for anything? Probably both. A couple of days later, the utility bill appeared in her mailbox. The amount wasn't huge, but for her now, it was insurmountable. It had to be paid by the end of the week. And there was no money. None. Absolutely none. That evening, she rummaged through all the drawers in the old dresser. In a cookie tin, she found some change, $1.38. She carefully stacked the coins. The next day, she went to the nearest store, bought the cheapest loaf of dark bread. "It's all right," she thought, walking home. "I can survive on bread and water, as long as there's enough for oatmeal. The rest, I'll figure out later." That night, she barely slept. Lay with her eyes open in the dark, calculating in her head. How many days until the next check? What would these few coins cover? How to avoid falling behind on the utility bill? And most importantly, how not to get sick now, God forbid. The medicine money, set aside penny for penny, mustn't touch that, she whispered into her pillow. And if something starts hurting, we'll endure, not the first time. At the end of the week, as expected, there was a knock on the door. A stern woman from the building management stood on the threshold. "Miss Vance, you have an outstanding balance on your bill." Yes, dear, I know. I'm a little behind this month. My check will be here soon. I'll pay everything right away," she replied softly, trying to smile. "The payment deadline is Monday. After that, late fees will start accruing, just so you know." She nodded silently, watched the woman's retreating back and thought, "You'll leave now, and forget about me in a minute, and I'll stay, alone, with these numbers on the bill, with my blood pressure starting to act up again, with an empty wallet and anxiety in my heart." After the woman left, Eleanor sat down at the table, took out an old notebook with a worn cover, found the page with the inscription, "For a rainy day." Tucked between the pages under this heading was a neatly folded bill, $20. Her emergency fund, which she had kept for many years. She took out the bill, held it in her hands, sighed heavily. "Well, here it is then. Your rainy day has come, Eleanor," she whispered. On the 8th day after the station incident, she couldn't bear it any longer. Gathering her last strength, she went to the social services office. Not to beg, no, just to find out. Maybe she was eligible for some kind of assistance. Maybe some recalculation was possible. In the hallway, a crowd, a hum of voices, stuffiness. A line of people just like her, elderly, tired, with hope and despair in their eyes. "Who's last?" "I have an appointment for this time. Let me through. No line. I just have a quick question." She stood quietly to the side, waited, for a long time. Finally, her number was called. She entered the office, explained her situation, calmly, without complaints, without tears, just the facts. A young employee with brightly painted eyelashes and a tired look glanced briefly at her documents. "No, Miss Vance, you are not eligible for any additional benefits. Everything is paid on time according to regulations. Your Social Security income is standard." "I just thought, maybe," Miss Ellie began. "Everyone thinks," the employee cut her off without looking up. "Next." She went outside. The air felt particularly cold. Sat down on a bench at the bus stop. Tears wouldn't come. Only her hands trembled slightly, from the cold, or perhaps from hurt and helplessness. A cold March wind tugged at the collar of her old coat. People hurried past, not noticing the lonely elderly woman on the bench. She didn't ask. Never in her life had she asked anyone for anything, not even now. She just sat there, watched the cars go by, and for the first time during these days, doubt crept into her soul. Sharp, painful. Did I do the right thing back then? Was that impulse worth such a price? That evening, the power suddenly went out in the entire building. A problem on the line, the neighbors said. The apartment plunged into unfamiliar darkness and silence. The radio was mute. The television, a dark rectangle. She found a candle stub on the shelf, lit it, sat in the kitchen by the window, near her violets. The candlelight cast whimsical, dancing shadows on the walls. "Lucky you," she joked mirthlessly, addressing the flowers. "At least they don't take your light away." It seemed to her that one of the violets sympathetically tilted its velvety leaf. Or was it just the shadow playing tricks? Before bed, she took an old photograph out of an album, black and white, with cracked corners. In it, she, young, smiling. Beside her, her husband George, also young, handsome, and between them, their son, still just a boy, about 7 years old, standing on the bank of a river, happy. She looked at the photo for a long time, then stroked her husband's face with her finger. "What would you have said, George?" she asked the photograph quietly. Would you have given that kid the last of the money? Huh. And she answered herself, almost in a whisper, "You would have. Of course you would have. You were always like that." She lay down in the cold bed, closed her eyes, and for the first time during this whole ordeal, felt a real, chilling fear. But not for herself, not because of the empty wallet or unpaid bills, but because, maybe, that young man never made it home after all. And then all of this had been for nothing, completely in vain. March stubbornly refused to yield to spring. The slush underfoot turned into a sticky, gray muck. Wet snow fell lazily from the low sky, melting on shoulders and down collars. Breathing was difficult. The air was damp, raw, the icy wind chilling to the bone. Eleanor Vance was returning from the store, with an empty tote bag. Not because she forgot to buy something, but because there was absolutely nothing left to buy anything with. The last $20, the ones from the rainy day fund, had gone the day before for blood pressure pills. Without them, her head started to buzz like a disturbed hive. The world swam before her eyes. She had almost gotten used to this persistent hum. It had become the background noise of her existence. In the evening, she sat on her old kitchen stool. Before her on the table, a glass of water and a thin slice of stale bread. Tea without a tea bag, just hot water with a faint, lingering aroma of the past. Her stomach growled betrayingly with hunger. She placed a hand on her belly and tried to joke, addressing it. Now, don't be angry, friend. Be patient. Tomorrow there'll be oatmeal. Almost real oatmeal." But tomorrow seemed to have frozen for her, stopped arriving. A few days later, she felt noticeably worse. Her legs became weak, disobedient. Climbing to her second-floor apartment became a real ordeal. Each step brought pain in her knees and shortness of breath. Her heart would sometimes stop, then start pounding like crazy. She often felt dizzy. Everything around seemed unreal, as if in a fog. She tried her best not to show her weakness, even to herself. "Come on, Ellie, get up. Don't fall apart," she told her reflection sternly in the old hallway mirror. "You survived the war years. You've seen worse than this. Is this really trouble? Just minor things." But her voice trembled betrayingly, and unwelcome tears welled in her eyes. Her neighbor Brenda, meeting her on the landing, shook her head worriedly. "Miss Ellie, what's wrong with you? You look so gray, thinner. Should I call a doctor?" "Oh, Brenda, don't be silly." She waved it off, trying to smile. "I just had some strong tea this morning. That's why I'm pale. Everything's fine with me." But things were not fine. On the 9th day after her visit to the social services office, she fell. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly and mundanely. She had simply gone to the kitchen for a glass of water, and her legs gave out. The world tilted and went dark. She came to on the cold linoleum floor of the kitchen. Her head throbbed like a bell. Her right arm wouldn't obey, hanging limply. She tried to sit up, but her body felt weak, alien. She managed to sit, leaning her back against a kitchen cabinet. She couldn't stand up. How long had she sat like that? An hour? 2? Time lost all meaning. The apartment sank into twilight, then darkness. Only the old clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, and water dripped monotonously from the faulty faucet in the sink. Drip, drip, drip. Fragments of thoughts raced through her head. This is it. This must be the end. No one will even know. Not today, not tomorrow. Only when the smell starts spreading through the hallway. The neighbors will get worried. She didn't cry, didn't even try to call for help. She knew no one would hear through the thick walls. She just stared at the dark ceiling and whispered with dry lips, "Well, Lord, if you exist, If it's possible, just not like this. It's too humiliating. If only someone would walk by. If only someone would knock on the door. But no one walked by. No one knocked. She was found only the next morning. The same neighbor, Brenda, got worried when Miss Ellie didn't answer her phone calls or open the door. She called the building Super Emergency Services. Then came the ambulance. Stretcher, hospital corridor, a doctor's white coat. The diagnosis sounded like a sentence. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, hypertensive crisis brought on by nervous exhaustion. Grandma, how did you let yourself get like this? How were you even holding on all this time? The gray-haired doctor wondered, studying her EKG. You need constant monitoring. You absolutely cannot be left alone. She stared at the white hospital ceiling. It was as indifferent as the sky outside the window. And who can be? She asked quietly. Just yesterday on the news, some famous millionaire argued with his wife and jumped off his 20th floor balcony. Had money, had security, and who saved him? Nobody. Well, what about you? Do you have anyone? Relatives? Children? Grandchildren? She slowly shook her head. Had them once. A son. But he's far away. And other than that, no one. Now I'm the last little branch on an old tree. She spent a week in the hospital room, hooked up to an IV drip. Polite but utterly strange nurses bustled around. Her roommate, a grumpy old woman, complained and muttered endlessly about something. The television in the lounge blared news about elections, rising prices, some endless reforms. Eleanor Vance mostly remained silent, lay there, looking at the ceiling or out the window. Sometimes she stroked her thin hand, palm against palm, as if trying to warm herself, as if missing someone's warm hand beside hers. She didn't regret giving away the money. No, she hardly thought about the young man from the station. Just occasionally, the thought flickered. If only he knew. If he could imagine how dearly his ticket home had cost her. Maybe he would have come back, written just a line, called, just let her know he was okay. But there were no letters. The phone remained silent. Nobody was looking for her. And then, one evening, when dusk had already gathered outside the window and a dim nightlight glowed in the room, the door creaked open softly. And it all began with one word. Quiet, hesitant, almost disbelieving, asked in a whisper. "Grandma?" The voice was unfamiliar, young, male, but something in it trembled, something so familiar, not by blood, no, by some deep, forgotten memory. Eleanor Vance slowly, with effort, turned her head towards the door. In the doorway stood a young man, tall, well-built, in a simple black jacket. Not the frightened boy from the station at all. Different, grown up. In his hands, he held a bag of fruit, some kind of notebook, and an old, worn-out mailing envelope, the very same one. He stepped into the room, walked over to her bed, carefully sat down on the edge of the chair. You probably don't remember me," he began quietly, nervously. "It was a long time ago, 10 years, at the station. I couldn't leave then. No ticket, not a penny. And you gave me a hand pie. And then, the money, your whole check, in this envelope." She looked at him, without taking her eyes off him, silently, studied his face, his eyes, and suddenly she remembered, vividly, clearly, that cold day, the battered backpack, the narrow, trembling shoulders, the despair in his eyes, and her own hand pie in his hand, and her words, "That's important. Just don't lose yourself." She slowly nodded. Her lips formed the question on their own. Did you make it home? He gave a wry smile. A shadow of the past flickered in his eyes. I made it home, Grandma. I made it. They met me there, hugged me, forgave everything. And then life got complicated. Military service. Then I found work. Then, well, somehow everything worked out. But all of this only started because you, back then, you didn't walk past. You believed in me. He carefully handed her that same old envelope. I kept it all these 10 years, like a good luck charm. I really wanted to return it to you. Both the money and just to say thank you. But I didn't know how to find you. Didn't know your name, your address. I only remembered the station. Every year I came back here, to this city. Went to the station, asked the vendors, the ticket agents, if anyone remembered the grandma on the bench. And just recently, I happened to run into the woman who sells the hand pies. She's worked there a long time, and she remembered you. Told me which neighborhood you lived in. I was looking, and then I found out that you were here, in the hospital. He lowered his eyes, his voice trembled. Please forgive me, for taking so long to find you, for not being able to sooner. Forgive me that you're here, like this, alone. Eleanor Vance reached out her weak, thin hand and touched his strong one. The skin was warm, alive. Not alone, she said softly. And for the first time in many days, she smiled a real smile. Not anymore. From that day on, he came to the hospital every day. He brought homemade soup in a thermos. He cooked it himself as best he could. Fruit, so she could regain her strength. Fresh newspapers. He read her the news and articles aloud. They talked, a lot, about everything and nothing. He told her about his life, about the struggles, about work, about small victories. She listened, sometimes asked questions, sometimes just smiled silently. He helped her sit up in bed, supported her when she tried to walk down the hospital corridor, leaning on his arm. The nurses and other patients initially exchanged surprised glances. Then they got used to it. Is that your grandson? The curious ones asked. Almost, Eleanor Vance replied with a warm smile. Almost a grandson. A week later, he came with documents. He had arranged to become her legal guardian, her caregiver. Voluntarily, without any ulterior motives. He had a small rented room in another part of town, a steady construction job, and a huge, overwhelming desire to take care of her. She means more to me than any apartment in the world, he told the surprised social worker firmly. 10 years ago she gave me a second life. Now it's my turn to repay the debt. When Eleanor Vance was finally discharged from the hospital, he carefully drove her to his place. He put her beloved violets on the windowsill where they would get the most sun. Found her few old photographs among her belongings, of her husband, her son, and carefully hung them on the wall above the table. Here you go, Grandma. Make yourself comfortable, he said, looking around the modest but now cozy room. This is your home now, too. She would wake up in the morning and hear familiar sounds from the kitchen. It was him, Michael, that was his name, clumsily but diligently cooking oatmeal for her. He brought her tea in her favorite old cup, tucked a warm blanket, which he had bought for her himself, around her legs. In the evenings, he read newspapers aloud or old books from the library. And sometimes, they just sat side by side in silence. He would take her wrinkled hand in his and just hold it. And in that silence, there were more words than in any conversation. What's your name, dear? I never really asked properly, she realized one day. Michael, Grandma. My name is Michael. She looked at him with a long, warm gaze and smiled. Michael, a good name. Well now I have a Michael again. He froze for a moment. Surprise flickered in his eyes. Why, again, Grandma? She gently patted his cheek with her dry, warm hand. Because my own grandson, my little Michael, I lost him once. A long time ago. But you, I found you. Must have been God sent. 2 months passed. Eleanor Vance imperceptibly settled into Michael's small room. Settled in as if she hadn't moved in with a stranger, essentially, but home. To a real home, the kind she hadn't had for many, many years. Her few books found a place on the shelf next to his technical manuals. The violets bloomed lushly on the sunny windowsill, a delight to the eye. On the dining table lay a tablecloth she had embroidered in her youth. Michael found it among the things he collected from her old apartment when helping her move, carefully washed it, and even hand-stitched a couple of holes, learning how from an online video. In the mornings, she now cooked the oatmeal herself again, on a small electric hot plate, slowly, unhurriedly, as she was used to. Michael kept trying to break her habit of everything on full blast, and get her to use the electric kettle instead of boiling water in a saucepan. She grumbled like an old woman at first, but gradually got used to the innovations. "You're just like my George," she told Michael with a smile. He was always improving something, redoing things, never sat still. "And do you know who you remind me of, Grandma?" he replied, helping her put on a warm sweater. "My mom, only you're the real one, mine." One day, they went to the post office together to collect her Social Security check. Miss Ellie walked slowly, but more confidently now, holding onto Michael's arm. She wore a new, warm coat and a nice knitted hat. Michael had chosen and bought them himself, insisting she shouldn't skimp on herself. At the post office window, the familiar clerk raised her eyebrows in surprise upon seeing her with the young man. "Eleanor Vance, where are you living now? I heard your apartment was sold." "No, dear, not sold," Miss Ellie answered with quiet pride and a gentle smile. "I live with my grandson now. He's my main support and hope now." "Grandson?" the woman asked, genuinely surprised, shifting her gaze to Michael. "Of course, grandson," Grandma confirmed and looked at Michael with affection. "The best grandson in the world. God himself sent him to me, right at the station 10 years ago. Just imagine that." At that moment, Michael turned slightly towards the window, not because he was embarrassed by her words, just so the clerk wouldn't see the stinging in his eyes. In the evenings, they often sat together in the cozy silence of the room, drank tea with simple cookies, listened to the old radio. Miss Ellie loved the request shows. Michael read newspaper headlines or interesting articles aloud to her. She listened attentively, sometimes commented, grumbled about politicians, and sometimes drifted off to sleep right there in her old armchair, lulled by his voice. He would then quietly clear the cup from the table, turn off the radio, cover her legs with the warm blanket. He did everything silently, habitually, with a kind of filial tenderness, as if it had always been this way, as if they had always been together. And one day, looking at him with her clear, quiet eyes, she said, "You know, Michael, I used to think often, why am I living? Why am I living out my days? Everything important, my husband, my son, my work, it all seemed to be left behind. Only emptiness ahead. But now it feels like everything is just beginning. That the most interesting part is still ahead. Strange, isn't it?" He nodded silently and squeezed her hand. "Not strange, Grandma. Not strange at all. It's because we're together now. That's all." Michael's neighbors initially watched the young guy with the old lady with curiosity. Some of the more sympathetic old ladies even tried to ask Michael who she was to him. He answered simply and honestly, "She's my grandmother. She's the person who saved me once, when no one else could or wanted to help." One time, on a warm spring day, he took her to a small cafe near their home. Not a diner, but a real little cafe, with cozy tables, the smell of fresh pastries, and coffee. "Sit right here, by the window, Grandma," he said, helping her take off her coat. "I'll bring you a surprise now. Wait just a minute." He went up to the counter, spoke quietly with the barista. A couple of minutes later, he returned to the table. In his hands was a plate, and on it, 2 golden brown, hot, savory hand pies, with potato filling, exactly like the ones back then at the station. He placed the plate in front of her. She looked at the hand pies, and suddenly froze. Her hands trembled slightly. Is this like back then?" she asked quietly, lifting her tear-filled eyes to him. He nodded, sat down opposite her. "Yes, Grandma, like back then. I still remember that taste. The pie was so warm. But the warmth wasn't just from the potato. It was because you were the first person in a long time who simply saw me. Didn't judge, didn't walk past. Who believed that I wasn't completely lost. That I could still go home." She didn't pick up the hand pie right away, just sat there, looking at him, as tears slowly rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. "My goodness," she whispered. "And I was so afraid back then. Thought, he'll forget in an hour. Who knows who helps whom at a station? But you remembered everything." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I didn't just remember, Grandma. I lived by it all these years. By your kindness, your trust." They ate the hand pies in silence. And that silence was filled with such warmth and understanding that no words could convey. And then they walked home, down the sun-drenched spring street, arm in arm, like the closest people in the world, like mother and son, like grandmother and grandson, like 2 people who once, completely by chance, met at a noisy station, and became destiny for each other. Summer arrived early in the city that year, generously scattering sunshine. The sun peeked into the windows of Michael and Eleanor Vance's room, playing highlights on her gray hair. The violets on the windowsill bloomed so lushly and harmoniously, as if they too rejoiced in the summer and the new life. Miss Ellie sat in her favorite old armchair by the window. A stray kitten, which Michael had found in the yard a couple of weeks earlier, and whom she now spoiled with milk, purred contentedly on her lap. On the table beside her, a small vase with fresh cookies they had baked together the day before. And in the corner of the room, Michael was concentrating on ironing a shirt. He had recently quit his construction job and was now preparing for an interview. He decided to try getting a job in social services, to help lonely elderly people just like his Grandma Ellie once was, because now he knew for sure how important it is for a person to be needed, and how terrifying it is to be needed by no one in this vast world. "Michael, dear, haven't I become tiresome yet?" Grandma asked unexpectedly, looking at him with her bright eyes. "I'm old now, grumpy. A burden, probably?" He turned off the iron, walked over to her, crouched down beside the armchair, took her dry, warm hand in his. "Grandma, what are you saying? If it weren't for you back then, 10 years ago, I might not even be alive today. Not here, not anywhere. But now I just want to be near you. Always. That's it. That's enough." She gently stroked his head. "Just being near," she repeated quietly. "You know, dear, sometimes that's more than the rest of life. Much more." On the door of their old refrigerator, The worn envelope from the station now hung on a magnet, and next to it, a photograph, the two of them, Michael and Grandma Ellie, smiling, sitting on a park bench, and beneath the photo, an inscription written in Michael's unsteady hand. Home isn't a place on a map. Home is the person waiting for you.